Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer, and I'm joined today by a terrific guest, Deanne Fitzmaurice. I'm thrilled to have her on the program. She's a Pulitzer Prize-Winning photographer. She's a co-founder of a camera bag and accessories company. She's worked for years in the newspaper industry. She's leading workshops. I could literally list everything she's doing, and we would be at the end of the podcast. So before we get started with Deanne, I want to let you know that, as always, the podcast brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance. You can check out everything they have going on at mdphotoalliance.org. There's always contests and upcoming events, lots of information, lots of things to see that'll help you work on the craft that you enjoy so much, that we all love. And so I really encourage people to check it out. If you take a look at the site, come back a week later, because chances are there have been new things added, new events, and it's really a great place to go down a photography rabbit hole. So definitely encouraging you to do that. So with that intro, no further ado, I want to welcome Deanne Fitzmaurice.
Thank you, Mitch. It's great to be here.
Well, I became aware of you many, many years ago because of Think Tank, a company that you co-founded with your husband. That was, your picture was on the little label on the backpack. And I thought, wow, that is about the coolest thing. What got you and your husband to decide that was something you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, it happened organically, really. My husband, Kurt Rogers, and I, we were working as staff photographers at the San Francisco newspapers. He was working at the Examiner, and I was working at the Chronicle. So, super competition, trying to outshoot each other, elbowing, trying to get the best shot, of course. So over the years, we felt like the bags that we needed didn't exist. Whether we were running up and down the sidelines of a 49er game, whether we were hopping on an airplane to go on an assignment, we felt like we really didn't have what we needed. So we were trying to figure it out. And Kurt was tinkering away with different things for photographers. As newspaper photographers running around the city, we'd come back from an assignment and kind of throw your cameras in the trunk of the car, and hopefully it hit a bag as the camera went in. So he ended up coming up with this thing. He called it the Pro Crate, and it was just a padded, compartmentalized case in the trunk where you just can throw your cameras in, and they're very well protected, but you are able to get your equipment real quickly as well. So he developed this thing, but had no idea how to get it manufactured, knew nothing about patents. And, it's just such a big world out there when you look at how do you develop a product and get it to market. So he ended up meeting up with Doug Murdoch, who is currently the CEO of Think Tank. And the two of them just started talking about, how can we create better bags together? And so fortunately, Doug knew manufacturing, he knew design, he knew distribution. And Kurt and I knew what we needed, what was needed in the industry. So we joined forces and started Think Tank in 2005.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and seemingly from an outsider's perspective, very successful story. So before our interview, while I was preparing, I thought, just for the fun of it, I would take a look in my photography closet. So with that, I'm going to read off a few names to you. Backlight 36, Shapeshifter 15, Retrospective 30, Hydrophobia, Pixel Pocket Rocket, Turnstiles 5, 10, 20, Airport Essentials, Airport Security, Glass Limo. That is the roster of Think Tank gear that yours truly is the proud owner of.
That is impressive. Nice mix of bags. A little heavy on the backpacks, I would say. How are you doing on rollers? I don't think you mentioned a roller.
Let's see, the roller that I have, I believe, let's see, is that the is the airport security, the roller? My
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can tell you that that roller I have had for years, which actually is one of the things I first thought when I had my very first think tank bag, because it's so well made. This is going to sound like a commercial, but it's so well made. I thought, if you make a product that's so durable, it doesn't need to be replaced for a really long time. So I guess along that line, you've got to keep innovating and coming up with other things, because, if you need a new camera bag every 8 to 10 years, you don't want to have that one customer only 8 to 10 years at a time. And the menu of products and accessories has grown, substantially over the years. But yeah, that's what I'm working with these days.
Well, it's people like you who keep us in business because we all need so many different bags. It just depends on what assignment you're doing, what you're going to shoot, where you're going, you're getting on an airplane, you're getting in a car. But we also think of our bags like that. We think there are the bags that are designed to get you somewhere, and that would be a roller or a large backpack to get your equipment, on an airplane or, train, car, however you're traveling. And then when you get somewhere, you need another bag to shoot out of, something, whether it's a belt pack, pouches, smaller backpack, shoulder bag, sling bag. So we're always trying to, solve problems and try to figure out what people in the industry need.
Well, since we talked about what you carry your gear in, and naturally, when you're carrying your gear, you're going somewhere. So I noticed that you and I share a real appreciation for the country of Cuba. And I've been there now, I believe, 3 or 4 times. Last year, published a book on my Cuba photography, and I absolutely love the people. I love just everything about it. What is that connection point for you with Cuba? What do you enjoy most there?
Yes, congratulations on your book. I'd like to see that. That sounds wonderful. I first went to Cuba, I think it was around 2014 or 2015. I went with a friend, and I just was blown away at what an incredible country it is. But it was the people that I was so drawn to. They're just so warm and welcoming. And so I just really enjoyed people photography, street photography, and it's such a colorful culture as well. I loved, just learning about the music and the food. Of course, it's a very complex place, politically, and, the people are dealing with so much, and they still come across with such big hearts.
Well, and I was looking at your website, which is terrific, and I was looking at some of the photography that you've done, if I pronounce this right, in Cabrera.
Yes, Cabrera.
And I too have been to a number of countries in the African continent, and one of the things that my takeaway is, whether it's Cuba or it could be places like Bangladesh or throughout Africa, generally speaking, I have found an openness towards myself. I'd like to think Westerners in general, but you have to obviously understand that you're not in your country anymore. So, there's a way to sort of, as that expression goes, lead with love, lead with an openness. So for those who, are photographers, they enjoy photography, but they really haven't taken their photography outside of their country, or outside of their comfort level. When you go to a country that you're maybe not super familiar with and you have a camera, part of acclimating is connecting with people. So how do you try to make those connections early on when they don't know you, you don't know them, you're a Westerner and you've got a camera, and maybe there's a language barrier? So how do you try to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think it's so important to connect with people and to put them at ease, especially in some of these situations that you're describing, like in Cabrera, where it's a sensitive situation and people may be dealing with a lot of adversity. And so I have to figure out, how do I put them at ease? And sometimes I find just having a conversation with them, hopefully there's not a language barrier. If there's a language barrier, I just try to use body language. Just a warm smile often puts people at ease. But I'll just spend some time, sometimes just explaining who I am, why I'm here, why I think this story is important.
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of times, as I've walked through different villages, and you have people kind of looking at you, and they're not sure, what you want or why you're there, or if you're trying to tell a story in a way that might not be complimentary, and so I've often just connected with children where they're very curious, and I personally I'll kneel down, and I typically use humor because hopefully funny is funny in any language. And then when the kids are laughing, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, they obviously want to see what's going on, and they see you're not there in any way other than just to be friendly and meet people. And so that's for me anyway, that's tried to bridge that language barrier when they are. In looking at your story, I know you were born in Massachusetts. You graduated from the Academy of Art College in San Francisco. What made you go from Massachusetts to San Francisco? Kind of what was that path about?
Yeah, I was just looking for something different. And I think it really ties into the life that I've created for myself as a photojournalist. I'm always looking for something new, something different, trying to explore, trying to understand the world, see different places, understand different people and cultures. So, as soon as I was old enough to drive practically, my best friend and I just jumped in a van that I had bought, like an old van with built-in beds, shag carpeting, the
Oh my
whole deal.
gosh.
We said, let's go to California. And, my mother was petrified. She was saying, Deanne, that van is not going to make it to California. It's probably not going to make it out of town. I said, Mom, it's fine. Don't worry about it. So off we go. We get about as far as New Jersey, and the engine blows up. So all these things work into my life as a photojournalist. I had to figure out how to problem solve. How do I solve this problem of having a blown up van on the New Jersey freeway and still needing to get to California, not having too much money? And it's like, okay, there's got to be a way this can be done. So, one thing led to another, and I ended up coming back to Massachusetts. My father had an old station wagon. I said, hey, Dad, are you still using that station wagon? He had offered this station wagon to me early on. And I said, no, Dad, I'm, a little too cool for that. I need a van with shag carpeting. And so anyway, I went back and got his station wagon. Then off we went again, and we made it to California. A trip that was just full of adventure, and we were so young. We didn't have a lot in the area of street smarts, but pretty good instinct and understanding. I'd say we did okay, and. So we made it to California. I fell in love with San Francisco. We had some friends out here. We were here for about 2 weeks, and then I decided, I went back to Massachusetts, and I said, okay, I have to figure out how to get back to California. So I applied for school, got accepted at the Academy of Art, and then came back out here. And initially, I thought I was going to be an artist. I was interested in painting, drawing. So I started taking all kinds of art classes. And after a while, probably about a semester in, I realized I wasn't that great at art. And I was also just frustrated by it. I'd stay up late at night in my studio apartment by myself, trying to create some work of art. And it just wasn't going well. And so I said, okay, let me just see if I can switch gears a little bit. And, they had a graphic design photography track. So I started heading down that direction. And then I started taking every photography class that was available: architectural photography, food photography, studio photography, portraiture, a little bit of everything. And then I took a class in photojournalism, and that was it. There was no turning back at that point. I just got to go out into the world, and that suited me so much better than being in a studio by myself. I was out, I was engaging with people, I was learning about people and cultures and issues, and it was about storytelling. It was like, how do I create a story, and how do I create a compelling image? How do I, as I started doing editorial work, and I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I tell a story within one frame? Mm-hmm. And I loved the craft of that, and it just grabbed me. And so to this day, I am as excited about that process as I was at that point.
So, one of the threads that I'm kind of seeing as we're talking about this is a willingness to try stuff. To be a young woman and say, I'm going to get in the Cheech and Chong van, and I'm going to go from the, far East Coast to the far West Coast, very different culturally. And then I'm going to, get into art, which is, that there's a risk inherent in the arts. And then, to pursue what you did in the way you did it. And then fast forward years later, when you and your husband co-founded the business, I'm sensing a personality trait of, if I see it and I want it, why not try to make it happen? And I mean, has that kind of been, what you have you felt that consciously, or has it been kind of almost subconsciously that, yeah, that's just the way I've always been?
Well, I think probably I have been thinking about it, more recently, thinking about, it's so interesting to think about, being true to ourselves, finding out what is our authentic truth. For so many years, I worked on staff at the Chronicle, and I loved it every day, exciting new adventure, new story to tell. But I left the Chronicle to freelance. I left there in 2008. And then I had to really do some reflecting on, what is it I want to do now? How do I want to shape my work? Who are the clients I want to work for? What are the projects that I want to work on? And so during the process of that, I did some soul searching. And yeah, I have always gone towards adventure. And actually, I'm going to blame my father for that, because so my father was a night fighter pilot. And so from him, I got the love of adventure, I think. And my mother, she was a librarian. And from her, I learned the love of story. So these two things have served me so well as a photojournalist.
He of the station wagon loner.
That's right. Yeah. He was a little bit more adventurous in his youth. And then as he grew up, a station wagon was fine with him. He didn't need a fighter jet.
Well, you're talking with somebody who grew up with the parents who had the Ford Country Squire with the wood paneling on the exterior. So I get the whole station wagon life. Totally get it. Yeah. So you go to school, you get your degree, and now, as we've heard many parents say to their kids, now the real world. So after you graduate, how do you segue from being a new graduate to that very first job?
While I was still in school, I figured I wanted to get kind of, a leg up on things. So I started to figure out how to get my work published while I was still a student. And so I would just, wander into offices and try to speak with photo editors. I had this portfolio under my arm, and, it was very much a student portfolio. These images were not that nuanced, but, I think what I had at the time, I had a lot of drive, as I still do. I did not have a fear of rejection, which I still don't. And so I would just walk into places. Like I walked into the Associated Press Bureau while I was still in school. And I said, could I show you my portfolio? I'd love to do some assignments for you. The editor looks at my portfolio and, kind of pushes it back across the desk to me. And he says, come back. Yeah, you're on track, but, maybe come back in a year or two. And so he starts walking I start walking towards the door, and he says, kind of like, hey kid, I look over my shoulder, and he like tosses a couple of rolls of film to me. He says, take these out and see what you can come back with. I said, okay. So I went out to Golden Gate Park the next day and spent the entire day in the park looking for an interesting feature picture. And I did find something interesting. It was a guy sitting, he's suntanning, he's sitting in a lounge chair. He's got a book, I think it was a book about Marlon Brando. And all of a sudden, these two Canadian geese come walking up on either side of him and arch their necks over each shoulder, like they're looking at the book. And so it just made a funny little moment. So I take that and I go back to the editor, and he ends up putting it on the wire. And then again, okay, here's a couple more rolls of film. So it went like that. So just little by little, I was getting a few things published.
Who knew that the birds would be Marlon Brando fans? That's awesome. That's really something, just just to see all that happening. So, I guess so there, that's how you sort of get into it in the beginning. Now, as a kid, were you from a photography family? In that, did mom or dad have the camera on the family vacations and all that, or was it not really that big a part of life growing up for you?
Well, it's funny because my mom actually had a brownie when I was a little kid.
Okay.
She would take the family photos with a brownie. I couldn't believe it. I mean, like now thinking back on it, it's like I look at these photos and I mean, that's just amazing. And who knows how much something like that impacts you and influences you. Then, kind of move on to my teenage years, and, my brother got a camera, and I'm kind of looking at that and was intrigued by that. But, I never really thought I could make a living as a photographer. Don't ask me why I thought I could make a living as an artist.
Right. If a photographer wasn't going to get it done. Yeah. Yeah, right. Exactly.
I know. I didn't quite have things figured out then. I was definitely interested in art. And I think that a lot of that has worked its way into my photography, because I had years of art training, the history of art and composition. And, I think all that has seeped its way into my photography. But it was just the being out telling stories that resonated with me. So those two things worked really well together. So I had started to get a few things published. There was a small paper, Peninsula Times-Tribune in Palo Alto. I walked in there and they just started giving me assignments. I was living in San Francisco at the time, which is, about 30 minutes north, and their staffers were living mostly in Palo Alto. So I would get all the great San Francisco assignments, like, hey, Deanne, can you do us a favor and go pick up this Bruce Springsteen concert?
Right, exactly. Sure, why not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm going, okay, this works for me. So I started to build my portfolio, and I just really loved the variety of assignments, to go from news to sports to entertainment, working on portraiture, and there's just so much variety to it. And I just loved every day being challenged, going on site and then having to figure it out, maybe put people at ease, understand what the story is quickly, and then figure out what is the best way to show this visually.
Well, and the area that you were in and the area that you're in now, just from a photography standpoint, whether it's architecture, landscape, sports, portraits, street photography, I don't know that there's a better area literally in the world than that Bay Area for all those forms of photography.
Oh, it's so true. It was so rich, still is, just so rich with so many things going on, especially coming from, a small town on Cape Cod. I come out to California and everything is new and fresh and exciting and there's so much going on. And I was just charged up by it. And, living in a city was exciting. And, just everything about it was resonating with me.
Yeah, just, I moved to, I mentioned before we started recording, I moved to Los Angeles at one point. And, because of that, I would find myself everywhere from San Diego all the way up to the Bay Area. And I just found, California with, everything I mentioned before, including the beaches and it's just, coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, it's a very different world. It's a very different mindset. There's generally a lot of traffic, that's for sure. But it's just a really unique place that it's almost like sensory overload because there's just so much you can see.
Yeah, it's so true. So it's been a great place to work as a photojournalist.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned that after graduating, you took your student portfolio in for them to have a look at. And I guess the question I want to ask is, and this is advice for amateur photographers, serious hobbyists, as well as professionals. When you look at someone's portfolio where they say, hey, what do you think of this? I'd like your advice, and appear to want an honest answer. What are the few sort of most common themes, if we can call it that, where certain basic advice you might give or questions you might ask that person about the image, what they were thinking before they made it, do you see with any consistency, areas of general improvement for the amateur photographer?
I think there's so much to be said about editing. I think oftentimes people have too much work. They may have redundant images. And so a lot of times it's really just getting rid of things and looking for, the cream of the crop, what's rising to the top here. Looking for images that have impact. Sometimes I think photographers early on may have images that are busy. And I think there's something about just figuring out how to clean up the composition. And coming from a photojournalist, that happens while you're shooting, while you're doing the photography, and you're just being hyper aware of the background. I feel like the background of a photograph is as important as the foreground, as important as the main subject, so that you don't have things sticking out of people's head. And I do think, there's the cleaning up of it. And then there's the next level where I think we start seeing images with more nuance, maybe more layered images, where you've got something in the background that's helping to tell the story of what's happening in the foreground. So I like, I said I don't like cluttered images, but I like complex images. So there's a lot going on within the frame, foreground, middle ground, background, but they work together. They're not competing with each other. Your eye knows where to go when, like it goes to, the first thing that you see and then kind of moves around the frame and gets more information. Yeah, and your eye usually goes to the lightest part of a frame. So, thinking about that, thinking about where you want to direct the person's eye, If it goes to something really white and bright in the frame, maybe that's not where you want the eye to go. So thinking about those things as you're composing the photograph.
Yeah, I'll often ask a person when they show me a picture and they'll say, well, what do you think of this? And a lot of times my first question is, what is the subject of your image? Where do you want the viewer to be focused? Because often they know because it was something that motivated them to take that picture, but to the person being asked, they're not in that person's brain. They have no idea. And there's about 11 things in that frame. And so, that's where sometimes the conversation about composition comes in, sometimes the conversation about aperture. Do you want, naturally you want your subject in focus and reasonably sharp, but then other complementary or balancing elements might be less in focus as that central theme that you want, very in sharp and clear focus. I remember during my interview with Jean Fruth, Jean said she is a brutal editor. She says she will just edit and she's heartless and she will just edit. And, we were talking about how, she could start with 1,000 images and she'll have it down to, 70 within no time. And I think that all of us, because we're the ones present making those pictures, we can almost develop an emotional connection where you're sort of having to choose which of your children is your favorite, and you don't want to get rid of any of them. What have you used over the years to sort of get over that and just, edit brutally and really cull the number of pictures down to, a manageable number?
Well, it helps having been on deadline so much. Where you just have to make a decision. You just get used to being quick and making these decisions fast. It's like, does it hit me? Do I feel something from it? A lot of times it's that, I'll just start with, let's say I start with 500 images, and I'll go through the first time and just anything that jumps out at me, tag, I edit on Photo Mechanic, tag, in. And then, maybe on the first run through, I get it down to 50. And then it's like, okay, now this is manageable. I can work with this. And then, I just go through, and a lot of times there's multiples of the same thing. And sometimes I'll even drag the multiples so they're next to each other. And then I start, the similars. So, I'll see a group of 10 images that are kind of similar, and then figure out, okay, which is the best one, and then just get rid of the others. And so that helps the process.
Well, nowadays with our cameras shooting anywhere from, 10 to 30, or, with this new Sony, 100 and something frames per second, there's such subtle differences often between photo 1 and 30. In fact, last night I was editing after a baseball game, and I had already sent out on deadline the images that needed to go. And now I'm looking at the stock images, and I'm pulling up about 8 images that, if you look quickly, they're the same. It was essentially a portrait of a player on the Cubs. But when I looked at the eyes were not right at me, not quite right at me, a little bit up, a little bit down. And then the one that was directly at me, I start it, that's the keeper. And so it's kind of looking at those fine points sometimes to differentiate, because if you look quick, they all look the same.
Exactly. Yeah. So if I go through, say, the 500 pictures and end up with 5 images, I will never, ever go back and look at the other 495. I just don't. I'm not a deleter. I don't delete anything. I keep everything in my archives, but I'll never go back and look at those. It's like, okay, I've got the best 5 pictures, and it just keeps it manageable. It makes it easy to move on to the next thing. So I try to, on the day of any shoot, go through it and try to get it down to a number like 5. The 5 best pictures, and that's it. One other thing I was going to say about when you were asking me, like what I would say to a young photographer, or, someone new in this space, it's so important to find the thing that you love to photograph. It's just, sometimes I think, it would be easy to be searching for, okay, what do I want to photograph? Where do I want to put my energy? And it makes so much sense to find the thing that you love. Like you're talking about Jean Fruth, who I love, and she's amazing. She found her thing, and it's baseball. Mine is kind of all over the place, really, because of being a photojournalist. It's like, so many different assignments, and I love that about it. But I think, there's a style of working with my work, and it's about storytelling, just how do I tell a story? So I think it's important that everybody, that's interested in moving forward with their photography is to just find the thing that charges them up, find the thing that they're excited about. It might even be going and looking over the work that you've shot over the last couple of years and, what are my favorite pictures? What images are exciting to me? Which ones, really make me feel something when I see them? And if you just think of it like that, I think it's easy to pull out, okay, these are my 5 pictures that I'm the most proud of. And then think, okay, is there a theme here? Is there something that I gravitate towards, something that I get excited about photographing and where I feel like I'm doing my best work?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. As you were talking that through, I was thinking, most of the people who are photographers, certainly the people who are listening, they're not assignment photographers, they're not newspaper photographers, they're hobbyists and people who just love photography. So where I'm going with that is often people have their camera. They go somewhere, whether it's a day or it's a week or however long, they want to come back with pictures, but they almost don't know what they want to shoot, but they know they want pictures. And so just as you and I over our careers have had very specific assignments that editors have given us, and then, we're in the field left to our devices to bring those stories home and so forth. Maybe you could talk about the idea of an amateur creating an assignment for themselves so that when they go, whether it's Disneyland or it's the beach or it's Italy on vacation, it could be anywhere, sort of creating your own assignment that you can deviate from, but at least it's a game plan. It's some themes going into to have some self-guidance as to what they're looking for. Do you see how that might be able to help amateurs especially?
Definitely, yeah. So I think there are assignments that you can give yourself for individual images. Then there are project assignments. So let's start with individual images. Something people could think about is, today I'm going to go out and look for juxtapositions. Like I've got one picture on my website, and it is of a Great Dane and a Chihuahua together. So things like that, juxtaposing 2 different ideas together. So that's one thing people could think about. Serendipity, I think, is just a beautiful thing, and just say, keep that in the back of your mind one day when you're out photographing. I'm going to be open to serendipity. One thing you could think about is, I'm going to start with the background and let the foreground come into it. So say you walk into town and you see this great background. Maybe it's a mural. Let's just say it's a mural. And you're sitting there and you've got it kind of framed up, and then wait for something interesting to happen in front of it, a passerby or just something that maybe works with the imagery that's in the mural. You could think about color. Maybe I'm going to go out today and my color is red that I'm going to think about, and only photograph things that are red. And then you come back and you've got this nice, interesting little series of reddish images. Let's see. You could think, maybe today I'm going to go out and I'm going to play with motion. I'm going to shoot everything on 1/30th of a second or slower and see what you come back with. You could say, okay, everything I'm going to shoot today, I'm going to do with a very shallow depth of field, say, f1.8. and just go walking around. So it's like giving yourself some parameters, but I think it's great for the creative mind to give yourself assignments like that. I mentioned the thing about the red images. You can create projects for yourself. Again, like, what are the 5 pictures in my work that I'm the most excited about? Is there a project that could spin out of this? Because I think it's important that everybody has a project that they work on. Now, there are projects that I may have, it's like a weekend project. It could be a week long, it could be a month long, it could be a year-long project, it could be a 20-year project. And it is something that you keep gravitating towards. You're photographing different things, but you've always got this one theme that you're going towards, something that's interesting to you. And you're building up work. One thing that might be inspirational to people to get thinking about project work would be go to a good bookstore, go to the photo department, and start looking at photo books. Most photo books have a theme, or they're based on a project. And I think that's a great way to get the wheels turning about what is a possible project that I could do. You and I have, been to Cuba many times, and I gravitate towards the color there, and that's one thing that I photograph, so it can be just intense color that you're gravitating towards. Could be the old cars. I know there's a photographer, Gerd Ludwig. I just got his newsletter the other day, and he photographs cars in Los Angeles that are covered. How sometimes people just cover their cars and they're just like parked out on the street, but they're covered. And it's just such an interesting thing. Another thing is night photography. You may decide that that's your project. Mm-hmm. And so you build up this work and it becomes something that you're proud of, something that you can share with people. And who knows, maybe it could eventually become a book. So that's a way of thinking that I think can be really inspirational for people. And I think it's a great space for your work to grow when you're working on one theme. Oh, yeah. And you might get, it's like, you might think, okay, I haven't shot anything to build my project in a while. I need to head out there and, maybe do some research about what else I could photograph within this theme.
Yeah, and I guess the idea of photographing sort of in any of our areas, wildlife and things like that, you've got your longer lenses, which makes sense. Same with sports. But when you're getting ready to either lead a workshop or you're on assignment, whether it's assigned by someone or you've kind of sort of self-assigned it, and maybe Cuba's a good example. What sort of gear kit are you typically bringing in terms of lenses to capture the street scenes, the landscapes, the architecture? Because we get asked those questions a lot, not brand specific questions, but more about just the lenses to give you the variety that's available when those scenes present themselves.
Yeah, I like to travel light. I don't really carry a lot of equipment. Like sometimes in Cuba, when I'm walking around doing street photography, I'll just have one body. And as you probably know, I'm a Nikon ambassador, big fan of Nikon. So I use the Z8s, which I love, mirrorless and, amazing cameras. So normally I would walk around with one Z8. I'll have a second Z8 back somewhere, maybe at my hotel or in the vehicle. But I'll just be walking around with one Z8. I'll generally have one zoom that is really versatile. The 24 to 120 f4 is a zoom that I love, and I feel like I could capture almost anything with that. It's not super fast, but I can bring the ISO up if needed without any quality degradation. Another lens I might have with me is a prime. Like maybe an 85, I've got an 85 1.4 that I absolutely love. I've got, 50-1/8 that I carry with me. And generally, I would probably have on the zoom lens. So if anything happens in front of me, distance, I can kind of capture it. But I've got those primed. So if I start working on something and it's really interesting, I might spend some time with it and, go to the prime, do some shallow depth of field, and, continue to work the situation. And that's something I think is really important that I see some photographers do that I think is a place where they can improve their photography. Like they'll see something that's interesting and they'll photograph it, take a few frames, and then move on. And I believe in spending time with something. If you thought it was interesting enough to click the shutter, then there's something there. And I think if you spend some time with it and really think about it, okay, if I change my lens, what's this scene going to look like? Maybe I could improve it. If I get up at a high angle and look down on this, what's it going to look like? Is there a way I could layer something behind it just by moving my angle that improves it? Yeah, so I do believe in spending time to really work a situation.
Yeah, I usually refer to that as don't just shoot the scene, shoot through the scene, shoot what you thought you wanted to shoot, but either keep shooting or hang out there for a few minutes because something, either an offshoot of the subject or something totally unexpected could happen. And, I sort of paid the price years ago. I was photographing PGA golf and I wanted to photograph the golfer putting, and I did. And after he contacted the ball, I photographed him and sort of watching the putt. Then I stopped photographing. And when the ball almost went in the cup, it kind of lipped out. I was no longer in a position to shoot, but his reaction, he did a deep knee bend. He threw his head back. He couldn't believe how close it was. And I missed that shot because I didn't shoot through the scene. I thought the shot was him trying the putt. And, that's a lesson that hopefully you only learn once, but unfortunately it usually takes a few times. You've got to build up that muscle memory.
Exactly. And with golf, you can shoot an entire tournament, walk 18 holes, and there's going to be one great reaction like the one you just described. And you do not want to miss those because they're rare. It's hard to show emotion with golf. And when you get something like that, yeah, you definitely want to capture that.
There was a golfer years ago. I don't even know if he's still on the senior tour, but his name is Dana Quigley. And I gave myself a project. This was during the practice rounds. And my project was watching spectators and golfers light cigars.
Ah, nice.
And Dana Quigley lit a cigar. And just as he lit it, as the flame was still up, a little wind kicked up. And it made the flame gigantic. And his expression, his eyes got huge. And that was completely unexpected. I just thought it was going to be this little montage of people having cigars at the golf tournament. So, yeah, it's definitely, exactly what you said is, unless it's landscape and you've got your tripod and you've got the sun doing what it's going to do or the clouds or whatever, when it's humans especially or animals, stay with it because the scene can change in an unexpected and wonderful way in a matter of seconds.
Right. And that little cigar scene you described, I mean, that is pure serendipity. But yeah, staying with something, but also assigning yourself a project. If you hadn't assigned yourself that project, you wouldn't have got that.
Never. No, definitely not. So when you were talking about your editing, it made me think of something that I was doing again recently, which is I edit, I can't say brutally, but I edit quite a bit. But what I find for me is when I go back to a trip, a ball game, whatever it is, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years later, I find looking at my photos with fresh eyes that are less emotional than in the moment, I find images that I didn't really see, I truly see the first time. And some of them I absolutely love. And I don't know how I missed it the first time. Do you ever really kind of like revisit the archives and see if there's some things you missed? Or are you so thorough that first time that once you move on, you're kind of done with it?
Normally, I don't go back. Once I make an edit, I do not go back, and that's just from being used to being on deadline most of the time. However, during the pandemic, I decided, you know what, I'd like to go back and look at the archives. I had worked for 20 years at the Chronicle, and there was this incredible body of work of 20 years of covering the Bay Area. So I reached out to an editor and said, do you still have a list of the assignments I shot while I was there? 10 minutes later, I get an Excel sheet that had about 8,000 assignments I had shot.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was incredible. I couldn't believe it. But that was so great because then I had a bit of a roadmap. A lot of that work was on negatives and so I just started working my way through this list and thinking, okay, what might be interesting here? And then going back. And the Chronicle was really helpful in letting me go and access those images. And so I put together, this little kind of a gallery of images from that period in time in San Francisco.
Well, I mean, that could almost be the premise for a book, just sort of a retrospective as much as what you have done, but of the city and the area around you, because obviously, there's so much change everywhere, but specifically in the Bay Area, just the evolution, with the tech industry and just everything. Are books something that you have a lot of interest in pursuing down the road, or is that not really something that holds great appeal for you?
Lately, I've become more interested in that, and I would love to make this San Francisco project into a book. It's a tough thing, though, because it's regional, So it's really hard to get a mainstream publisher to take interest in such a regional project. So I'm still trying to figure out, what to do with it, how to move forward with that. I did another project. A museum in Dublin, Ireland, reached out to me to document the city of Dublin from an outsider's perspective. So it was just like this dream project. And so last year I took 5 trips over there. And, it's just like, how do you even start to document a city? I did a lot of research and, I would go to some of the touristy places, but I was waiting for something real to happen, some serendipities, moments. And, and then I just started exploring the city and, getting deeper and deeper and learning more about it and understanding the culture and the people. And so I've pretty much finished shooting that project, and that is scheduled to be a book coming out in the spring of 25.
Well, and that ties in with a thought that I had, which is, with you being a person who has an idea, thinks about it, and then if it makes sense, you pursue it. Are there some projects for the balance of 24 and into 25 that you can talk about that you are either planning now or you'll be putting into motion soon, or are you pretty well just booked up for the next year and a half and you really have to look beyond that to add new things?
Yeah, so looking forward from this point forward, I have a 20-year project that I've been working on, and I would love to see that kind of come out into the world. It's actually my Pulitzer Prize-winning project of Salah, the little Iraqi boy, that I documented in 2005, and I've continued to follow his story since then. So I have photographed him every year, and this work has never seen the light of day. And I feel like, okay, it's been just about 20 years now. I'd like to figure out how to get his story out into the world, whether it's a film or a book. So just kind of looking at that and, trying to put some energy into that. He's had interesting developments in his life. So that's one project I would like to kind of move forward with. Thinking about, which clients I'm working with, trying to work more with nonprofits and, and even, commercial clients that, that want work done with kind of heart and soul. Telling human stories, for foundations and nonprofits. So yeah, stories that kind of affect and impact the way people feel about the world.
So I've got to ask, in the last 20 years, when you've been introduced, are you ever not introduced and the Pulitzer Prize being part of that introduction?
It does come up quite often.
So when I was about 12, my Little League team won the championship. That's about the only award that I could use before my name, because if I won the Pulitzer Prize, I think I would make reservations at a restaurant as Pulitzer Prize winner Mitch Stringer. I would own it. I would wear it. It would be, if I could put Pulitzer Prize on my license plate, it probably would be. So it's just an incredible recognition for you. And, I didn't delve into that with you because I just know you've talked about it justifiably in many interviews, and you've been asked about it. But your website and just so many websites get into so much detail on the amazing photography that you did to earn that achievement, and it's just remarkable. Not only with at that time the young boy, but with his family, to build a trust level and a comfort level of where you were coming from to tell his story and their story in a way that had just so much empathy and respect and tact about when to make pictures, when not to, because sometimes that's as important, especially when you're establishing trust with a family and an individual. So just a really remarkable story. One thing that I wanted to get your thoughts on, social media has, are obviously never been bigger than it is now, and it'd probably be bigger in a year than it is today. And you've got so many people, especially, people who I'll just say are 25 years of age and under, that are living in a world that they almost can't remember not having social media. I think goodness that there wasn't all that when I was a kid, because I'm sure I would have gotten in trouble doing or saying something. But, for kids who are of that age, who have an interest in visual images and photography, these are the people who are going to be storytellers in the years to come. How do you see social media when used positively and productively to convey messages through photography? What kind of opportunity do you think that presents for future storytellers using and leveraging social media?
Yeah, well, it's a way that we can all publish work now that we weren't able to before and get work out in front of a wide audience. Yes, social media, it's, just such a different animal because we didn't have this, like in my years at the Chronicle, and when it first became available, I resisted it at first, but I think now I look at it as it's very democratic because anybody can go out there and tell stories and bring them out to the public, out to an audience, hashtag and get people's attention. So I do love the democracy of it, but I also feel a little bit guarded as a photojournalist who has, these ethics that we learn in the business for storytelling, that I believe in it so deeply that, I believe in the authenticity of images. And, and not everybody creating images and putting them out there has that same.
It's almost like an ethos, almost,
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, so I kind of respect that so much, the art of photojournalism, that, I feel like it needs to be protected. Just journalism needs to be protected, photojournalism needs to be protected. But I think that it is a place for storytelling, that, people can create stories and get them out there into the world. But I think it's good for everyone to understand journalistic ethics enough to know why. I mean, the reason that we have the ethics that we do of journalism is about credibility. So that if somebody sees an image and it has my name under it, or any other photojournalist, you learn to know that you can trust that image, that it's real, that it's authentic, that that's the way it was when I saw it. So that's the whole reason to have this set of guidelines.
Deanne, I want to thank you for your generosity of time and willingness to be my guest. It's been just an absolute pleasure, and I, look forward to continue following your work as I have for many years. And I know that a lot of our listeners are going to want to follow it as well. What's the best way for listeners to keep up to date on what you have going on with your work and just various projects? How can they do that?
Yeah, I would say Instagram is probably the best way. My website, I am in the process of redoing my website, and yeah, kind of switching things around a little bit of a rebrand going on. So yeah, so I'd keep an eye on that. Facebook, I would say those are the likely places.
Okay, well that's great. So definitely do that. And I know for the listeners who want to keep up to date with what I have going on, probably like Deanne, Instagram is a great resource. You can take a look and see what I have happening at Mitch Stringer Images on Instagram, and then mitchstringerimages.com on the internet. Until our next episode, I wish you great light. I wish you happy shooting, and we'll see you soon.